Welcome back to Cheddar News. I'm Kristen Scholler. Okay, well, the football world descending on Cleveland, Ohio tonight as the NFL draft gets underway. And while there are some virtual certainties, quarterback Trevor Lawrence going to the Jaguars first overall, there's still plenty of mystery about what will unfold during this three-day event. So joining me now is Les Carpenter, sports reporter for the Washington Post. Les, it's great to have you with me this afternoon. The first night of the draft, always a ratings boom, generally is. Thousands of fans descending on the draft site in those pre-pandemic years. What are fans looking forward to tonight?
I think they're looking forward first to just a little bit more normalcy. I mean, last year was such a strange draft. It was a lot of fun. You got to see the inside of everybody's houses. You got to see the commissioner, make picks from his basement. But I think there's kind of the idea of being back to the big show in a place where there's a stadium, where there's people around, where there's crowds. I think that'll be kind of fun for people to see again. And then I think this is just going to be such an interesting draft. There's so much uncertainty with the football season that they had in college, where nobody, some guys barely even played at all, and so you don't really know how these teams value everyone. Everyone thinks they know, but I think when you get into this draft, there's going to be a lot of surprises, and that will kind of be interesting for everyone.
Always a lot of emotions at play as well. So the draft actually returning to an in-person event this year after being remote last year. What are you anticipating that overall atmosphere is going to be like?
Well, I hear it's raining in Cleveland right now, so we'll see what it's like tonight. So maybe that'll mute it a little bit. But I think people will just be kind of excited to have an event where they can stand around and cheer, and it'll kind of have the electricity and the emotion that maybe last year's didn't have. Last year's was interesting; it just didn't have that enthusiasm. And I think this time you'll have that, and it'll feel like a show and a spectacle a little bit more than it did, last year.
Yeah, of course, they're still different, right? So the NFL Scouting Combine, which usually happens a few months before the draft, actually canceled this year amid the pandemic. How does that play into these teams' scouting abilities and potential prospects?
Well, it's not just the Combine. While the Combine's a big event where everybody goes and talks to the prospects and they kind of get an idea, there's all the in-person visits. There's all these things that have kind of been canceled. Players have what they call the pro days at each university, where the scouts and all will stop by and watch them work out. But even then, it's a little different than it's been in the past. Usually this time of year, players are bouncing between, team buildings and facilities, coming in for interviews. You can't really do a lot of that. And then remember, too, in the fall, there were barely any games in many cases. So there's not a lot to go by, and teams are going to have to kind of guess and make, maybe projections that even more than they have in the past to try and think if somebody's really going to be a fit or not.
One first-round prospect, Virginia Tech cornerback Farley, announcing yesterday that he has tested positive for the virus. So given the unpredictability of this virus, do you think that teams will take that into account at the draft this evening?
Well, I think everyone will take everything into account. Several of these players probably already have either been exposed to COVID or had COVID. It certainly ran through a lot of college programs in the fall. I don't know the vaccination numbers. That's kind of been kept quiet. Yes, COVID's going to loom over everything, and there may very well be other players who will test positive before the draft. And now again, just because they're drafted today doesn't mean they show up in person to a team, tomorrow. It'll take a little time before they start to practice and things. So, all of this is uncharted territory.
We are also going to see the regular season extended from 16 games to 17 games for some of these college athletes that are thinking about moving in to the pro world. That's another game, another potential risk of injury. How do you see that impacting some of these young talented players that are going to be joining these teams?
Well, I think what will be interesting is this extra game, as you mentioned, it's just another chance for people to get hurt. It's just more wear and tear on players. And I think what you're going to see, today and just maybe even in future drafts is the need to really find players in the middle and later rounds of the draft that you think can add depth to your team. And sometimes I think fans get really focused on the starters and the few stars and everything. But I think more and more the wear and tear on bodies, just with 17 games, with maybe a little bit more expanded playoffs, just to the physicality of the game today, players are just going to get worn down and beaten up. up. And I think it's imperative to really do well in the later rounds to find players who maybe they won't be starters for you, but they'll be really good backups that you're going to need because your starters aren't going to be able to play 17 games all the time.
Interesting. Okay, so mini camps, regular, normal scheduled activities, group activities, all of this. What do you think these teams are thinking about heading into the season, and how might it be different this year?
Well, it still isn't certain. The league has not really said, okay, look, you can go ahead and we're going to have all these in-person mini camps where you can practice. They're hoping to get to that. Right now they're in what's called organized team activities, which is our players kind of are in meetings with coaches. And a lot of the players have refused to show up because they're just not certain, is this going to be safe or not? Do I really want to do this? I could just stay home and do this all on Zoom and it'll probably be fine. In time, I think everyone's hoping that by training camp, with vaccination rates going up, with hopefully, the rates of positive tests going down, that you'll be able to have a normal training camp. But it may not be until August before we kind of feel really normal around the NFL again. It may even be later than that.
All right, still a few months off, but we are certainly making our way back to some sense of normalcy. Les Carpenter, sports reporter for the Washington Post. We'll be watching the draft tonight.